Welcome to my channel, Brazil, a land defined by the hypnotic rhythm of Samba, the endless gold of Copacabana, and the untamed soul of the Amazon. For decades, it loomed in the global imagination as an exotic paradise of eternal joy. But beneath the carnival lights lies a deeper, untold history. Today, we peel back the layers of myth to understand a tragic reality: why Brazil is slowly losing its magic. This isn't just about economic numbers, it's about a nation's broken promise. Let's dive in. The illusion of the promised land. Every nation is built on a myth, but Brazil's was grander than most. For centuries, it was hailed as the country of the future. It is a land blessed with unmatched natural wealth, stretching across half a continent, untouched by the devastating world wars that leveled Europe and Asia. When the capital was moved to the futuristic, hyper-modernist city of Brasilia in 1960, the message to the world was clear: Brazil had arrived. The future was now. But futures built on illusions eventually crumble. The magic of Brazil was always masking a fragile foundation. The country's economy was historically trapped in cycles of boom and bust: sugar, gold, rubber, and coffee. Each boom created an elite class of unbelievable wealth, while leaving the hands that harvested that wealth in absolute poverty. The structural flaws were deep. While European nations spent the late 19th century and early 20th centuries building robust public institutions, legal frameworks, and education systems, Brazil was transitioning directly from a slave-dependent empire to a chaotic republic. The abolition of slavery in 1888, the last in the Western Hemisphere, was done on paper, but never in the hearts of the institutions. Millions were freed into a society that offered them no land, no education, and no rights. This is where the magic began to leak out long before the modern era. The favelas, the iconic hillside slums of Rio de Janeiro, were not accidental. They were the direct result of a government that chose to beautify its city centers for international visitors while completely abandoning its own people. The early 20th century was a golden age for the coffee barons, but for the average Brazilian, it was a cycle of survival. When you look at the breathtaking architecture of the Amazonian Opera House in Manaus, built during the rubber boom, you see the peak of Brazilian magic. Wealthy elites sent their clothes to Paris just to be laundered. But look closer, and you see the indigenous tribes decimated, the rubber tappers enslaved by debt, and a wealth that vanished the moment foreign competitors planted rubber trees in Asia. Brazil kept spending its future before it ever secured its present. The magic was real, yes, but it was an inheritance being spent away rather than an engine being built. The scars of dictatorship and the lost decade. If the early 20th century was a fragile dream, the mid-century was where the nightmare took physical form. In 1964, a military coup plunged Brazil into 21 years of dictatorship. To the outside world, this era was sanitized. This was the era of Pelé winning World Cups, the birth of Bossa Nova, and the Brazilian miracle, a period of staggering 10% annual economic growth. The military government borrowed billions from foreign banks to build mega-projects, massive highways cutting through the Amazon, giant hydroelectric dams, and sprawling industries. But miracles funded by debt are just ghosts waiting to collect. The military regime suppressed dissent, tortured critics, and silenced the press. More importantly, they hid the true cost of their miracle. They kept printing money to fuel growth, ignoring the basic laws of economics. By the time democracy returned in 1985, the bill had arrived. The 1980s became known across Latin America as the lost decade,
But in Brazil, it was an economic apocalypse. Hyperinflation tore through the fabric of daily life. Imagine going to the supermarket in Sao Paulo. By the time you walked from the entrance to the cash register, workers were actively changing the price tags, stamping higher numbers on milk and bread. At its peak, inflation reached an unfathomable 2,500% per year. This hyperinflation did something worse than destroy currency. It destroyed trust. When a citizen cannot trust that the money in their pocket will buy food tomorrow, the societal contract snaps. Savings vanished overnight. The middle class was crushed, pushed down into poverty, while the ultra-rich protected their assets in foreign banks. The magic of Brazil, that famous easygoing optimism known as eufonia, was replaced by a bitter survival instinct. People stopped planning for next year because they couldn't afford to plan past next Tuesday. The military regime left behind a broken economy, a deeply traumatized society, and an astronomical national debt that would shackle the country for generations. Democracy returned, but it inherited a house that was structurally on fire.
The commoditization of hope. Let's fast forward to the early 2000s. For a brief, shining moment, it looked like the magic had finally returned, stronger than ever. The world fell in love with Brazil all over again. A charismatic former metal worker named Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva became president. At the same time, a massive global commodities boom began. China's explosive industrial growth meant it needed everything Brazil had: iron ore, soybeans, crude oil, and beef. Money flooded into the country like a tidal wave. The economy boomed. Brazil arose to become the sixth largest economy in the world, surpassing the United Kingdom. Millions of citizens were lifted out of extreme poverty and into a newly formed Class C middle class. They bought their first cars, their first flat-screen TVs, and flew on airplanes for the very first time. The Economist magazine famously ran a cover showing Rio's Christ the Redeemer statue launching into space like a rocket, with the headline, "Brazil takes off." But it wasn't a rocket. It was a hot air balloon fueled by temporary foreign demand. Instead of using this historic mountain of cash to fix its fundamentally broken education system, reform its nightmare bureaucracy, or build competitive high-tech industries, Brazil made a fatal choice. It doubled down on being the world's farm and mine. It consumed its wealth instead of investing it. The government funded massive social programs that, while noble and necessary in the short term, were entirely dependent on commodity prices remaining historically high. Worse, the sudden flood of easy money corrupted the political system to its very core. When the commodity supercycle inevitably slowed down around 2012, Brazil was caught completely naked. The rocket stalled mid-air. The new middle class, who had bought consumer goods on credit, found themselves drowning in debt as unemployment soared. The hope that had been sold to the population wasn't built on sustainable economic productivity. It was commoditized, traded on foreign stock exchanges, and when global markets shifted, the hope evaporated, leaving behind an angry, betrayed populace. Operation Car Wash and the Death of Trust. In 2014, a routine money laundering investigation in a car wash in Brasilia stumbled upon a thread. When prosecutors pulled that thread, they unraveled the largest institutional corruption scandal in modern global history. It was called Operação Lava Jato, Operation Car Wash. This wasn't just a few politicians taking bribes. This was a sophisticated, multi-billion-dollar cartel involving the state-owned oil giant Petrobras, the country's largest construction conglomerates like Odebrecht, and virtually every major political party across the ideological spectrum. Executives traveled around Latin America with suitcases of cash, buying presidents, rigging elections, and overcharging billions for public infrastructure projects,
roads, stadiums, refineries. The scale was dizzying. Former presidents were jailed. CEOs of multi-billion-dollar empires were dragged to prison in handcuffs. At first, the Brazilian public cheered. They filled the streets in millions, dressed in the national colors of green and yellow, believing that the country was finally cleaning its soul. They thought this was the purging fire that would restore the magic. But the fire didn't just clean the house, it burned it down. The scandal completely paralyzed the economy. Major employers went bankrupt, throwing millions out of work overnight. More destructively, it caused the total collapse of public trust. Brazilians realized that the entire political and economic system was a rigged game. The institutions they were told to respect were merely masks for elite greed. The collective trauma of this realization cannot be overstated. It destroyed the belief that democracy could deliver a fair society. It created a profound, toxic cynicism. The joyful, unified cultural fabric of Brazil split wide open. Polarized hatred took root in the fertile soil of disillusionment. The magic didn't just fade here, it was actively stolen by the very people sworn to protect it.
The war on the future, education, crime, and brain drain. To understand why the magic is fading permanently for the younger generation, you have to look past the macroeconomics and look at the streets. You have to look at a country waging a silent war against its own future. Let's talk about public safety. Brazil accounts for only 2.7% of the world's population, but it historically suffers more than 10% of the world's intentional homicides. Entire neighborhoods in Rio, Fortaleza, and Salvador are trapped in perpetual turf wars between highly organized drug factions and heavily militarized police forces. Children in public schools routinely practice stray bullet drills, lying flat on concrete floors while automatic gunfire echoes outside their classrooms. And what about those classrooms? The Brazilian public education system is a tragedy by design. The country ranks near the bottom of every international PISA ranking for math, reading, and science. The elites send their children to hyper-expensive private academies, creating a parallel educational universe. The public schools, left underfunded and chaotic, act as holding pens rather than ladders of opportunity. A brilliant child born in a favela doesn't just face steep odds, they face an almost impenetrable wall. Because of this, a quiet, devastating phenomenon is accelerating: the Great Brazilian Brain Drain. Ask any ambitious, educated young Brazilian today about their dream, and an alarming number will give you the same answer: to leave. Scientists, software engineers, doctors, and artists are packing their bags for Europe, Canada, and the United States. They love their country. They love the beach, the food, the warmth of the people. But they are tired. They are tired of spending 40% of their income on taxes only to receive zero security, broken public hospitals, and non-existent infrastructure. When a nation's brightest minds conclude that their talents are worth more anywhere else in the world except at home, the magic doesn't just fade, it packs its bags and boards an international flight, never to return.
The broken mirror. Culture in the age of survival. Brazil's ultimate superpower was always its culture. It was the soft power that conquered the globe. The effortless coolness of Tom Jobim strumming a guitar. The cinematic raw power of City of God. The ultimate expression of human vitality that is carnival. Brazilian culture was a mirror that showed the world how to find joy even in adversity, how to smile through the pain. But today, that mirror is cracked. The economic stagnation and social fragmentation of the last decade have taken a heavy toll on the cultural landscape. Carnival has become hyper-commercialized, segmented by wealth, where the poor communities create the spectacle but are increasingly priced out of enjoying it. The collective euphoria has been replaced by an exhausting daily grind for basic survival. Even the national football team, the iconic Selección, which once united the country and symbolized the beautiful game, has lost its mystique. The best players are scouted and exported to European academies before they even turn 18, leaving domestic stadiums empty and disconnected from the local fans. Is the magic entirely gone? No, you can still find it on a Tuesday evening in a crowded Samba circle in Madureira, or watching the sunset over the dunes of Lençóis Maranhenses. The warmth, the resilience, and the sheer creative energy of the Brazilian people are still there. They are the true guardians of the magic. But resilience should be a tool for overcoming temporary crises, not a permanent way of life forced upon millions by a failed system. Brazil is losing its magic because it has exhausted its people's patience. A country cannot live on potential forever. Until Brazil decides to value its people more than its oligarchs, to invest in its schools more than its political campaigns, the magic will remain a ghost, a beautiful, haunting memory of what could have been. The country of the future is still waiting for tomorrow to arrive.